hardest part of having a very busy day is that you tend to forget the most important things, like what you had for lunch. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Narene's Life with MS. I am Narene, and it's time for What MS Taught Me. So, this Wednesday, what do I have to talk about? Well, MS is definitely a condition that, does end up teaching you a lot of things about, how you end up approaching life. And one thing that MS taught me is, regardless of how good or bad you think your life is, let me tell you, you need to get it told by another person how you compare in certain things and certain activities um, to people who do not have MS. Because for, let's say, for if I'm doing something, I will do it to the best of my ability. So usually the one thing I tend to notice is I tend to underplay the damage. And of course this means that whoever is evaluating me, they might overestimate it, but it's much more difficult to gauge what has happened as a result of you describing something, right? And the reason I say this is because yesterday, while I was there at the hospital describing my symptoms to the doctor and everything, I would mention something and my dad would mention maybe a number, a figure, or a certain level that in my mind felt very exaggerated. So for some reason, for example, when I would talk about the fact that it takes me a little longer to read, now technically according to me, yes, my reading has slowed, but I would say that it has slowed to maybe 60-70%, right? Obviously I can't read certain things, so if they show, for example, if you're watching a TV show or a movie and they show text chains happening and texting happening on screen, usually I'm not able to read that. I'm not able to read very small font, but I honestly thought that I still retained, let's say, 60-70% of my reading ability. And then my dad said 30% that I only have retained, and like I read at 30% of the speed of, let's say, a regular person. And that made me actually think that, am I really that slow? Like, is it that if someone is taking maybe a minute to read a page, is it going to take me 3 minutes to read the same page? And that confused me to a very large extent, because I was under the impression that yes, my vision has been impacted, but probably not to that much of an extent, right? And then I actually really thought about it. And I thought about the fact that I'm not able to read small font, I'm not able to read anything that is moving too quickly. A lot of times there are certain things that appear as flashes, and normal people, or at least people without any issues in their eyes, are able to read it, and I definitely cannot. Suddenly made me realize that it's not so much so that whatever I am able to read, I am reading it faster or slower than another person. It's just the ability, right? What is the extent of abilities of my vision that has been compromised or not? And honestly, considering that you know it has become practically impossible to read anything on TV, right? It's become, I'm usually more looking at what is on TV, right? Who are the characters, who are the people, what does the clip, what does it look like, what does it sound like, that actually makes me that actually makes the decisions for me. Suddenly made me realize that, oh right, yeah, maybe maybe having 30% of a regular person's abilities is more in line than I realized. And as scary as this whole idea is, as scary as this whole thought is, um, that is just a fact of life. So definitely one thing that you know people can do, and of course vision is just one example I went with, right? I mean, I can definitely talk about, let's say, my walking, my movement, my fatigue. I mean, all of them, usually I tend to say, okay, yesterday I was able to do this, today I can do this, so that means that I still retain 80% or 70% of anything. But then you know I'm only doing it on a much smaller scale as compared to someone else, right? Someone who maybe sees me on a day-to-day basis and actually seeing that progression, right? Actually seeing that sort of decline over time. And they have made certain, they have evaluated me on a completely different level. So that is definitely one thing I do want to share with everyone, that it that if you do have something, if you do have a medical condition that where your body is undergoing degeneration, definitely do have someone, a friend, a family member, to actually give you an evaluation of how your abilities are. Because they are seeing you, right? Seeing you as a person, right? They are not you. So whatever you're able to do, whatever you can do, you see it in one way, right? For example, if let's say you are walking to another room in your house, you are only experiencing the part of walking to that room, right? Or and whatever other things that happen in between, that someone else is actually seeing you do it. They're seeing you know the facial expressions you make, they're seeing the way you're walking, they're seeing your reactions to certain things that are happening, what is happening. So you definitely might want to sometimes ask others how they see you as opposed to someone else, right? Because you know one thing I can definitely say is a lot of times I can get up from here, I can walk to whichever room in this house, and I will feel maybe more or less the same way I felt a week ago, maybe even a month back, maybe even 2 months back or 5 months back. But someone else will actually see that, okay, this is how your posture is changing, this is how your gait is changing, This is what you're looking at when you're walking towards a certain place. And I think the biggest wake up call for me was, you know, watching myself walk, considering I've got a mirror right over there, watching myself walk to, wherever, just walking a few steps in front of the mirror and realizing that my shoulders are hunched, um, realizing that, I am pretty much perpetually bent forward, um, you know, pretty much, in no way, shape, or form are my legs moving, either of my legs technically moving correctly, and then at the same time, um, at least correctly to each other, in relationship with each other. So there are so many things that do tend to happen, and definitely having someone that can tell you, that can actually share the experience of seeing you function, is so important to have, because you know um, because time for us, regardless of how um, quickly or slowly it moves, the one thing that does happen is we don't exactly evaluate ourselves against the passage of time. And we just, and generally, when you have a condition like MS, your memory is not perfect in any way whatsoever. So chances are you are going to forget what, a daily life look back, your daily life was like, let's say 10 years ago or 5 years ago. So it is, you know important sometimes that you do talk to people, ask them what have they seen, what kind of progression have they seen in you, what kind of degradation have they seen, what kind of degeneration have they seen in you, right? What has changed over the course of, let's say, an X number of years, right? So that, rather than it being somewhat of almost snapshots for you, in between, maybe important events, you get a much better idea, because you're going to be actually getting more of a movie on how, your body has transformed, how your functionality has changed over the course of time. So it is always very important to really get that objective response as to what, how these things have happened, how these things have changed. Because at the end of the day, it's not our fault that, we have this condition. But at the same time, we do need someone to actually let us know when, certain things are maybe not looking right, because a lot of times it just exists in our head. And so we ourselves might just tell ourselves that, oh no, this is maybe something that we are imagining, something that may not be there. But for that other person who is seeing you, who is interacting with you, for them it is much more real, it is much more apparent. And so a lot of times they're a much better judge of letting how you are doing than what you can tell you know them instead. So this is a little bit of a shocker that I had when discussing certain things with the doctor yesterday. But of course, with all of that said, I hope that you are interacting with people, talking to people about your condition, um, understanding how your condition has developed, not only through what is happening in your head or what you are experiencing, but also what other people are experiencing with you. So, of course, with that said, this is Nareen Saifat MS. I am Nareen. I do hope that you did understand a little bit. Maybe you can share your own thoughts, your insights, your experiences if you've had this realization or if you've had this kind of interaction, so that we can definitely get a conversation started. But of course, since I'm done with everything I have to say, besides the fact that Wednesday has passed, which means that tomorrow is Thursday and the weekend is right around the corner. Of course, since I'm pretty much done with speaking, I just want to wish you a good night, sweet dreams, and I'll catch you tomorrow. Bye.